Was wearing the gray blazer I had dry cleaned for him the week before. I remember staring at it from the hospital bed. The way it sat perfectly on his shoulders, not a wrinkle, not a thread out of place. And thinking, he dressed up for this. Not for me, not for the day we were finally going home, for dinner. You understand, right? He said, not really asking. The reservation's been on the books since March. My parents flew in from Phoenix specifically for this. I had just had surgery 4 days ago, a full hysterectomy at 31, because the fibroid had grown to the size of a grapefruit, and my doctor said we'd waited long enough. 4 days of a catheter, of morphine that made the ceiling spin, of squeezing a pillow against my abdomen every time I needed to cough. 4 days of my husband of 6 years, visiting exactly twice. Once on the day of surgery for 40 minutes because he said the hospital smell gave him a headache. Once on day 3 to drop off a smoothie he'd had his assistant order through DoorDash. And now it was discharge day. And he was wearing the gray blazer. Your parents flew in, I said slowly. And you're going to dinner with them. Tonight. While I go home. It's not like you need me to carry you, he said, picking up his phone from the windowsill. I already called you a car. The driver's name is Marcus. He's got a 4.9 rating. You'll be fine. The driver's name is Marcus. I looked down at my hands folded over the hospital blanket. My nails were chipped. I'd been meaning to fix them before the surgery and never got around to it. There was still a faint bruise at the crook of my left elbow from where the IV had been. I thought about the morning of the surgery, how I'd lain on the gurney in the pre-op hallway for 40 minutes alone because visiting hours hadn't started yet, how I'd texted my husband and he'd sent back a thumbs up emoji, and how I'd told myself that's just how he is. He's not good at hospitals. It doesn't mean anything. I'd been telling myself some version of that sentence for 6 years. Okay, I said. He looked up. Surprised, maybe, that I hadn't argued. I'd spent 6 years not arguing, so I wasn't sure why he'd expect it to start now. He kissed me on the forehead, dry, quick, the way you kiss a relative you don't know well, and said he'd be home by 10-11 at the latest. The door swung shut behind him. I sat there for a moment. The room was very quiet. There was a get well card on the nightstand for my coworkers at the firm, a small succulent and a terracotta pot that my friend Diane had brought on day 2, and a half-eaten cup of hospital jello that I hadn't had the appetite to finish. Somewhere down the hall, a baby was crying. Then I picked up my phone and called my brother. He answered on the second ring. He always answers on the second ring. I think he genuinely cannot stand to let it go to 3. Hey, what's up? You heading home today? Yeah, I said. In about an hour. Good. You need me to come get you? I didn't say anything for a second. My brother is 41, a decade older than me, and he has a habit of asking simple questions that somehow cut directly to the thing you can't bring yourself to say out loud. You need me to come get you. Not where's your husband, not can't he take you, just do you need me? Yeah, I said again. I think I do. There was a brief pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. My brother's name is Daniel. He drives a beat-up Chevy Silverado that he has refused to trade in for 15 years because, as he puts it, the truck has never done anything wrong to him. He works in commercial real estate, not the flashy kind, not luxury condos, but warehouses and distribution centers and the occasional strip mall. And he is the least dramatic person I have ever met in my life. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't make speeches. When he showed up at my hospital room 22 minutes later, still in his work clothes, he just looked around at my packed bag and the empty chair by the window and said, "Ready?" "Ready," I said. He helped me into the truck with a steadiness that made me want to cry. I didn't. I stared out the passenger window the whole ride home and watched the city go by in the late afternoon light, the sandwich boards outside coffee shops, the kids on scooters on the sidewalk, the orange construction cones on the overpass we've been driving over for 3 years, while they supposedly fixed something. And I thought about the last 6 years with the practiced numbness of someone reviewing a document they've read too many times to feel anything about anymore. I met my husband Ryan at a friend's birthday party when I was 25 and he was 28. He was charming in the way that people who have never been told no are charming, effortlessly, almost accidentally. Like it cost him nothing because it never had. He was funny. He remembered small things at first. He remembered that I took my coffee with oat milk, that I hated the word moist, that I'd wanted to be an architect as a kid before I ended up in corporate law. I thought, this is a person who pays attention. What I learned later, slowly, in the way you learn things you don't want to know, was that he paid attention the way some people read a room. Not because he cared, but because it was useful. Because it worked. We got married when I was 27. My father walked me down the aisle and whispered in my ear right before we reached the altar, "You sure about this one, Bug?" He called me Bug from the time I was 3 years old. I'd spent 27 years trying to figure out where it came from, and he'd never once explained it. "I'm sure," I told him. And I was, or I thought I was, which at 27 feels like the same thing. By the time I was 30, I wasn't sure anymore. But by then we had a mortgage on a house in Scottsdale and a joint account and a life that had accumulated the way lives do. Quietly, steadily, until one day you look around and it's so heavy you can't imagine picking it up and carrying it somewhere else. So I stayed. And I told myself the things you tell yourself. He's stressed at work. He doesn't mean it like that. He's just not affectionate. Some people aren't. He loves me. He just doesn't know how to show it. He loves me, I told myself, right up until the day I was lying in a hospital bed after major surgery. And he called me a car with a 4.9 driver and went to dinner with his parents. Daniel pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. Neither of us moved for a minute. "You want to tell me what happened?" he said. So I told him. Not all of it. Not the 6 years of small things, the texts that went unanswered for hours, the holidays he'd spent annoyed and distracted, the birthday he'd forgotten entirely and then acted wounded when I mentioned it, just the last 4 days, the 2 visits, the smoothie, the gray blazer, Marcus with the 4.9 rating. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked out the windshield for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay? Yeah." He opened the truck door. "Let's get you inside." He helped me up the front steps, got me settled on the couch with a pillow wedged under my knees the way the discharge nurse had shown him, and put the kettle on without asking whether I wanted tea. Then he sat down in the armchair across from me and said, very quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Is this it? Or is this one more thing you're going to let go?" I stared at the ceiling. It was 7:15 in the evening. Ryan was somewhere across town, probably on his second glass of wine. Probably telling some story that made his parents laugh. His parents had never particularly liked me. His mother had a way of looking at me like I was a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the rest of the room. And I had spent 6 years trying to change her mind by being agreeable and small and easy to be around. It hadn't worked. "I don't know," I said. "I'm tired." "You should be tired," Daniel said. "You just had surgery." He picked up his mug. "But that's not what I meant." I looked at my brother. He looked back at me. He has our mother's eyes, dark brown, very steady, the kind of eyes that don't flinch. "No," I said. "I think this is it." He nodded once. "All right," he said. "Then let me make a call. I need to explain something about my brother that matters here. Daniel has been in commercial real estate for 15 years, which sounds like a mundane kind of career until you understand what it actually means, which is that he has spent 15 years building relationships with every kind of business professional in the city: contractors, zoning attorneys, city council members, and yes, family law attorneys. Because commercial deals go sideways and personal lives go sideways, and Daniel has always known exactly who to call when either one happens. He made the call from the kitchen. I couldn't hear the specifics. He kept his voice low. But it lasted about 12 minutes, and when he came back, he sat down and said, "I want you to talk to someone tomorrow. Her name is Patricia Webb. She's been doing family law for 20 years, and she's very good. I've sent work her way a few times." He paused. "She owes me a favor." "Daniel, I can't afford." "I'm not asking you to afford anything," he said. "Just talk to her." I talked to her. Patricia Webb was a small woman in her early 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a handshake that would have impressed a senator. She came to the house, Daniel had arranged it so I didn't have to go anywhere while I was still recovering. And she sat across from me at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and she listened for an hour and 20 minutes while I talked. I told her things I hadn't told anyone, about the joint account that Ryan had been drawing from and amounts I'd noticed but never investigated, about the credit card statements I'd seen once and looked away from, about the business loan he'd told me he'd taken out for a startup with a friend I'd met exactly once, at a barbecue, who'd seemed vague about what the business actually did. Patricia wrote everything down. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she uncapped her pen and said, "Do you have access to the joint account statements from the past 3 years?" I did. I'd never looked at them carefully, but they were there, in a shared folder on Google Drive that Ryan had set up when we bought the house. Patricia asked me to pull them up. I did. We spent another hour going through them together. What Patricia found, really, because she knew what she was looking for and I didn't, was a pattern. Not dramatic, not obvious, but consistent. Transfers in round numbers to an account I didn't recognize. A Venmo payment history that didn't match any expense I could account for. A wire transfer of $11,000 in October, right around the time Ryan had told me his startup was going through a rough patch. And could I maybe not mention the money stuff to his parents when they visited at Christmas? Because it was stressful enough already. "The account the transfers are going to," Patricia said. "Do you know whose it is?" I didn't. She told me she could find out. She did in 48 hours. It belonged to a woman named Kelsey. She was 26 years old. She lived in an apartment in Tempe. The apartment, Patricia's investigator had determined, had been rented under a corporate LLC, an LLC that, when you dug through the paperwork, traced back to Ryan. He had been paying her rent for 14 months. I sat with that for a long time. It's a strange feeling, finding out something you almost knew. Like pressing on a bruise. The pain is familiar. The shape of it was already there. You just hadn't looked at it directly before. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "How are you holding up?" he said. "I found out he's been paying someone else's rent," I said, "for over a year." Silence. "Okay," he said. "That's all you're gonna say?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm also going to say, don't touch the joint account. Don't say anything to Ryan tonight. Just sit tight. What are you gonna do?" "I'm going to make another call." Here is what Daniel did in the order that he did it. He called Patricia and authorized her to move forward with filing immediately. He called the bank where Ryan and I held our joint account and spoke to a manager he'd done a construction financing deal with 3 years earlier. And he began the process of understanding what protections existed and what disclosures were required. He called the accountant who had done our taxes for the past 4 years and asked some very specific questions about the business loan and the LLC and whether the numbers made sense. They did not make sense. The business loan Ryan had told me about $60,000, taken in both our names, secured against the equity in our house, had been used, in part, to fund the LLC, which meant that my credit, my name, my house, had been used to pay another woman's rent without my knowledge or consent. Patricia called it commingling of marital assets for personal benefit. She used some other phrases too, more technical ones. What they added up to, in plain language, was, he had used our shared life to fund a secret one. Ryan came home at 11:15 on the night I got out of the hospital. I was in bed, the lights off. I heard him move through the house. The clink of his keys on the kitchen counter, the sound of water running, the soft thud of his shoes being towed off by the back door, all the familiar sounds of a life. He came into the bedroom and stood in the doorway for a moment. "You asleep?" he said quietly. I didn't answer. He went to the bathroom, brushed his teeth, got into bed. He was asleep in 8 minutes. I know because I lay there in the dark and counted my own breathing and felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely clear. I called Patricia at 8 the next morning. "Tell me what comes first," I said. She told me. I won't say it was easy. It was not easy. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life in some ways, harder in some moments than the surgery itself because the surgery had a clear timeline. It begins, it ends, you recover. And this had no such shape. It was paperwork and phone calls and conversations with Patricia that left me feeling hollowed out in ways I hadn't expected. It was the day Ryan finally understood what was happening and sat across from me in the kitchen with a face I had never seen on him before, something stripped and unfamiliar, and said, "You can't do this. You're being insane." "I'm really not," I said. "Everything I did was for us, Ryan," I said. "I know about the LLC. I know about Kelsey. I know about the loan." His face changed again. Something went through it. I watched it move through him like a wave, and then it went very still. "I want you to understand something," I said, "and I need you to really hear it. My name was on that loan. My credit. My equity. Whatever you were doing, you did it with my life. And I am done." He tried several things after that. He cried, which was unexpected. He got angry, which was not. He texted me 6 times in one day with variations on the theme of, "We can fix this," and "I made a mistake and I'm sorry," and once, memorably, "You're throwing away 6 years because of one bad period," which I read 3 times and then showed to Patricia, who raised her eyebrows and said, "That one might actually be useful." What Ryan did not seem to understand, what took him weeks to fully absorb, was that the conversation was already over. Daniel had made his calls. Patricia had filed her papers. The joint account had been appropriately documented. The loan, which Ryan had assumed was safely invisible, was now the subject of considerable professional scrutiny. Patricia told me later that his attorney had seemed almost as surprised as Ryan was. "He came in expecting a straightforward divorce," she said. "He was not expecting the financial discovery. The settlement took 4 months. I won't go into every detail because some of it is still subject to a confidentiality clause, but I will say this. The loan was assigned solely to Ryan's side of the ledger. The equity in the house was protected. My credit was cleared. Ryan agreed to terms he had initially called impossible, which told me everything I needed to know about how strong our position actually was. On the day the divorce was finalized, Daniel took me to lunch at a taco place we used to go to when we were kids, a little spot on the east side that had been there since before either of us could drive. We sat in a booth with red vinyl seats and ordered the same things we always ordered, and he didn't say anything particularly profound. He didn't need to. He put a hand on top of mine for a second and said, "You good?" "Yeah," I said. "I think so." He nodded. He went back to his tacos. Outside the window, the parking lot shimmered in the Arizona heat, and a kid on a bicycle wove between the cars, and the world just kept going, indifferent and unhurried, the way it does. I'd been afraid for a long time that there was no version of my life that didn't have Ryan in it, that I had waited too long, bent too far, let too much slide, that the shape of me had been permanently altered to fit around him. I know now that's not true. You can live inside something for years and still walk out of it whole. It doesn't always feel that way in the middle, but there is a middle, and it does end, and what's on the other side of it belongs only to you. I have a studio apartment now, on the 3rd floor of a building near downtown, with a window that faces east and gets good morning light. I make coffee with my own oat milk, and I drink it sitting on the floor next to the window because I haven't bought a couch yet. There's no rush. There's no one else's timeline I'm living on. My phone rings sometimes at 7 in the morning. It's always Daniel, on the 2nd ring, asking if I want to meet for breakfast. I always say yes. I think about that hospital room a lot, not the pain, the quiet. The get well card from my coworkers sitting on the nightstand. The little succulent Diane brought. The half-eaten cup of Jell-O I couldn't finish. And that chair by the window, the one that was empty every single day except twice. There's something that happens when you finally stop looking away from the thing you already know. It doesn't feel like a revelation. It feels more like exhaling after holding your breath for so long you forgot you were doing it. That's what it was like sitting at my kitchen table with Patricia, watching her trace through 6 years of transfers and wire payments and a $60,000 loan taken in my name. I hadn't been blind. I'd been choosing, every day, not to look. Ryan didn't become who he was because of some single moment of failure. He became who he was because nothing in our life together ever required him to be different. Every time I let something slide, the unanswered texts, the forgotten birthday, the thumbs up emoji when I was lying on a gurney, I taught him that there was no cost. That he could take more because I would absorb it, What I understand now is that the absence of consequence is its own kind of permission. I gave him that permission for 6 years, and he used every inch of it. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not what he did, but what I allowed. I'm not saying that to be hard on myself. I'm saying it because it's the only piece of the story I actually have control over, and control matters when everything else has gone sideways. Daniel never once told me what to do. He asked me if I was done, he waited for my answer, and then he made his calls. That's intelligence in the truest sense. Not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that knows which question to ask and when to stop talking. He understood something I was still learning. That having the right information and doing nothing with it is its own kind of decision. And Patricia, 20 years of family law, reading glasses on a beaded chain, writing everything down on a yellow legal pad like the world's most unhurried person. Patricia showed me what it looks like to think clearly inside a situation designed to make you panic. She wasn't moved by Ryan's anger or his tears or his attorney's initial posturing. She just kept working. There is something profoundly steadying about watching someone do their job with that kind of quiet precision. What I had to find, in the end, was the part of myself that could stand up inside the wreckage of something I had helped build. That's the hardest thing. Not the paperwork, not the settlement, not even the day Ryan sat across from me in the kitchen with that stripped, unfamiliar look on his face. The hardest thing was deciding, after years of making myself small enough to fit around someone else's life, that I was allowed to take up space again. I have a window now that faces east. I sit on the floor next to it every morning because I haven't bought a couch yet and I'm in no hurry. The light comes in at an angle that makes the whole room feel like something is just beginning. I don't know exactly what yet, but for the first time in a long time, I'm the one who gets to decide.